Put your phone down for a second, and don't do it with the heroic attitude of someone trying to be better. Do it like a person finally admitting what they're doing. Look at the dark glass. Look at your face reflected back at you. Now ask the uncomfortable question you've been dodging. Are you a free mind? Or are you a body getting drained by tiny, constant hits of stimulation that you call entertainment? You probably know the answer in your gut. You just don't want to give it a name. Because naming the problem would mean you have to change, and changing means losing the comfort of denial. This is the hidden self, and today we are going to dissect the most advanced cage ever built for ordinary people. Not a prison with bars, a prison made of pleasure, a maze made of convenience, a system that doesn't need to threaten you, because it already trained you to cooperate. We call it the matrix of harmful entertainment, but it's not just entertainment, it's a psychological operating system. It's attention engineering, it's dopamine management, it's identity replacement. And once you recognize how it works, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In your feed, in your habits, in the way you avoid silence, in the way you fear boredom, in the way your relationships slowly become background noise. This video is not here to make you feel enlightened. It's here to make you stop lying to yourself. Let's start with the first betrayal. You don't rest when you escape, you submit. When you come home exhausted and you open Netflix or you scroll TikTok until you forget what you were originally stressed about, you're telling yourself you're taking a break. That's the story. The reality is darker. You are feeding your brain into a passive state and calling it relaxation. There is a difference between rest and shutdown. Real rest rebuilds you. It restores agency. It brings your attention back under your control. Shutdown is something else. Shutdown is when your brain switches modes. The part that analyzes, plans, and chooses goes quiet. Meanwhile, the emotional alarm system turns loud. Your limbic system starts driving. Feelings become the steering wheel. Novelty becomes the fuel. Your mind stops asking, "What is true?" and starts asking, "What feels good right now?" That moment is where programming begins. Because the people who designed your apps did not do it for your happiness. They did it for your engagement. Engagement is attention. Attention is time. Time is money. Money buys influence. Influence buys power. And they learned the easiest lever is not fear, it's pleasure. They don't have to threaten you with catastrophe. They just have to keep you addicted to the next emotion spike, the next laugh, the next outrage, the next little victory, the next heartbreak story, the next dramatic reveal, the next clip that makes you feel like you're caught up. You are not caught up. You are stuck. Harmful entertainment is chemical in effect. Even if it's not a drug in a pill, it gives you sweetness immediately, and it gives your mind nothing substantial to digest. No new perspective, no deep learning, no lasting clarity. Just a sugar rush that teaches your brain to prefer shallow stimulation over meaningful effort. And here's the part most people hate hearing. You don't fall into this only because you're weak. You fall into it because your environment is engineered to reward you for staying passive. You think you're choosing content, but the system is training you to respond automatically. Let me tell you how that training feels from the inside. You start with a just one video promise. The promise is always sincere in the beginning. Your brain is still mostly yours then. You watch something and feel that tiny warm hit of dopamine. Not joy yet, just relief. A mild reward. Then you reach for another clip, because the first one has ended and the silence feels uncomfortable. Not silent like peaceful, silent like threatening. Silence gives you a chance to notice your own thoughts, and your thoughts often include unresolved pain, loneliness, regret, anxiety about money, pressure to perform, the sense that your life isn't moving fast enough. So you avoid that by keeping your mind constantly occupied. If you don't have the courage to face yourself, you will accept any distraction that pretends to be temporary. And that brings us to the first mechanism that makes modern manipulation so dangerous: short-form speed. Short-form content isn't just shorter videos. It's a direct assault on attention architecture. 15 seconds, 30 seconds, sometimes 60, designed to keep your brain in a constant state of anticipation. The pacing is intentional, the structure is intentional, the emotional triggers are intentional. The algorithm doesn't simply suggest what you might like, it recalibrates what your brain expects. It teaches you that rewards must be immediate. It teaches you that stimulation must be frequent. It teaches you that depth is optional and effort is punishment. Over time, your tolerance changes. You become less able to handle slow experiences because your brain has been trained to interpret slowness as boredom and boredom as danger. This is why reading becomes unbearable. A book feels like work because work requires your attention to stay active. It requires you to sustain. It requires you to tolerate uncertainty and unanswered questions. But your system has been conditioned to prefer immediate resolution. That is why a 2-hour documentary feels too long, a 20-minute podcast feels like too much talking, and even sitting quietly with your own mind feels like you're dying of discomfort. You're not dying. You're withdrawing from control over your attention. Your attention becomes the hostage, and a hostage is valuable because it can be moved. Here's the cost no one wants to count. Shallow attention destroys deep understanding. When you consume 100 fragments in one night about politics, economics, relationships, or self-improvement, you feel informed, you feel busy, you feel like you know things, but the mind doesn't just store facts like a hard drive. Understanding requires integration. It requires linking concepts over time. It requires comparison. It requires memory consolidation. It requires the ability to sit with complexity without flinching. Fragment consumption prevents integration. It creates the experience of knowledge without the substance of knowledge. You end the night exhausted, not enlightened. You end the night with opinions without frameworks. You end the night with emotional reactions, not reasoned beliefs. You end the night with a messy pile of unprocessed data, and the system calls that staying connected. But a mind that cannot form an internal map cannot resist manipulation. Because if you can't see the whole picture, you can be led by the loudest piece in front of you. This is why harmful entertainment is not neutral. It benefits from your fragmentation. A fragmented mind reacts. A fragmented mind argues. A fragmented mind consumes. A fragmented mind becomes predictable. It becomes predictable enough for marketing, predictable enough for persuasion, predictable enough for political theater, predictable enough for manufactured outrage that keeps you busy while nothing actually changes. Look at the way you argue online. Most of it is not about truth. It's not about understanding. It's about staying emotionally activated. The argument itself becomes entertainment. The enemy becomes content. Your frustration becomes fuel, and you never have to move from reaction to action, because reaction is safer than action. Action requires responsibility. Action requires patience. Action requires accepting that you might be wrong and still continuing anyway. Reaction only requires a keyboard and an emotional trigger, so the system gives you triggers. Now add another layer. Hollywood and big media didn't just entertain you, they trained your subconscious with scripts. Don't underestimate how powerful stories are. You think you're watching fiction, but your brain learns patterns through narrative. It absorbs emotional rules. It internalizes definitions of success and failure. It teaches you what real love looks like and what weakness looks like. It teaches you who deserves loyalty. It teaches you which kinds of suffering are romantic. And then it normalizes that suffering. Here's one of the most consistent motifs across mainstream hero stories. One person saves the entire world while the crowd is powerless. It's not subtle, it's a repeated dream. You're shown that real power comes from an exceptional individual, not from collective action and not from ordinary disciplined effort. What does that do to your mind? It installs a belief that you are not the main character who builds. You are a witness who hopes. It trains you to wait for someone else to fix things. And later, when you apply that mindset to your own life and relationships, you start waiting for rescue. The perfect partner, the right timing, the sudden miracle, the influencer who explains your feelings, the celebrity who says the right thing, the brand that validates your identity. You stop trusting your own capacity. Modern entertainment also attacks family values, not only with explicit messages, but with emotional sabotage. It floods screens with betrayal storylines, nihilism, cynicism, and the nothing matters vibe. It portrays commitment as a trap and adulthood as a slow decline into disappointment. Then it sells the escape route, consumption. If family life is depicted as conflict, then the solution becomes distance. Distance from parents, distance from tradition, distance from long-term responsibility, distance from the boring parts of love that require work. And when distance is normalized, brands step in to sell you a replacement lifestyle. Upgrades, trips, aesthetic identity, new purchases, new rituals, new curated versions of yourself. A lot of people aren't rebelling, they're being guided into loneliness that feels stylish, because loneliness is profitable. Now imagine the final form of the trap, the fantasy that replaces your lived experience entirely. Have you noticed how many people spend thousands of hours obsessing over characters and idols that don't even know they exist? Phantom hand culture, where you grip a virtual life like it's real because the alternative is confronting your own emptiness. This isn't just being a fan. It's a pattern of outsourcing your vitality. You don't adventure, you watch adventure. You don't practice discipline. You watch others practice. You don't build meaning. You consume meaning packaged by people who don't want you to be free. You become a viewer of your own life. You observe yourself living instead of living. That's what a passive brain does. It waits. It waits for the next recommendation. It waits for the next drop from the brand. It waits for the next trend to join. It waits for the next scandal to react to. It waits for the next person to declare what you should believe. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting is surrender. And surrender is what the Matrix is designed to create. To make this even more brutal, we need to talk about the chemical engine behind the psychological engine. Dopamine as a reward loop. Let me be clear. You are not just liking content. You are training your nervous system to crave a specific pattern of reward. Uncertain anticipation followed by micro-reward. This is the same family of mechanisms used in gambling. Not because your apps are identical to casinos, but because they learned the same truth about the human brain. Variable rewards keep you hooked longer than predictable rewards. Sometimes the next swipe is amazing. Sometimes it's trash. That uncertainty keeps you searching. Your brain starts to treat the app like a vending machine that might deliver a hit, and it keeps pulling the lever until it does. So every time you find something good, your brain releases dopamine in a small amount. Then, when the next clip fails to match the dopamine expectation, you swipe again to restore the feeling. You become addicted to the recovery process. Over time, this changes your baseline. Ordinary life starts to feel flat. A walk feels less exciting than a feed. A conversation feels slower than a clip. Real effort starts to feel boring because it doesn't arrive as quickly as stimulation. A normal afternoon loses flavor because your reward system is being hijacked. This is why people can't enjoy silence anymore. Silence isn't soothing, it's unfamiliar. It feels like deprivation. So you fill it instantly, and eventually you reach a point where you only feel alive while the device is in your hand. Not because you are meant to be a consumer, because your nervous system is conditioned to associate life with stimulation. That's slavery at the level of behavior. And even worse, it becomes slavery at the level of identity. You start believing you are the kind of person who must constantly be entertained. You start believing you can't focus. You start believing you're just that way. Then you stop trying. Because the system relies on one final trick. It makes your addiction feel like choice. It makes captivity feel like freedom. You think you're selecting leisure, but the selection is constrained. The moment you open the app, you are walking into a pre-designed flow of attention that is engineered to keep you inside. You are not just consuming content. You are participating in a machine that monetizes your mind. And once you understand that, you'll realize something more painful. Your attention is not only being sold, your attention is being used to control you. Which brings us to the war against boredom and the collapse of creativity. Boredom is not empty time. Boredom is raw material. In boredom, your default network activates. In boredom, your mind wanders. In boredom, you connect ideas. In boredom, unresolved feelings rise to the surface and demand meaning. Creativity doesn't bloom in constant stimulation. Creativity blooms in tension, in silence, in the discomfort of not knowing what to do next. That discomfort is where your mind starts building. But harmful entertainment wages war on boredom. It fills every gap. The queue, the commute, the waiting room, the toilet, the moment before sleep, the moment before you wake up. You touch the screen when you could have touched your own thoughts. And over time, you don't just lose focus. You lose the ability to generate thoughts. You lose the ability to hear yourself. You start experiencing your life as a sequence of interruptions and escapes, not as a continuous story you are authoring, not as a path you are walking. You become a photocopier of whatever the system last printed into you. That's why so many people sound identical online. It's not just culture, it's attention conditioning. If you repeatedly consume the same formats, the same opinions, the same emotional rhythms, you stop developing independent language. You borrow personality from your feed. You borrow beliefs from trending clips. You borrow values from whatever gets the most applause. And then you wonder why you feel empty, because values borrowed from outside can't stabilize you from the inside. Now consider the next escalation. When every serious issue gets turned into content, you lose empathy. This is a subtle destruction. It doesn't come as censorship, it comes as packaging. When war, disaster, tragedy, and crisis are edited like action movies with dramatic music and cinematic pacing, your emotional system is trained to respond to spectacle instead of reality. You feel the spike of intensity, but it doesn't deepen into commitment. You watch suffering the way you watch a show. Your empathy becomes performance. It becomes something you do while your device remains in your hand. You consume tragedy as if it's a genre. So what happens? People start to know about everything and still do nothing. They can recite details about global crises, but they don't change their own behavior. They don't donate, they don't organize, they don't speak up strategically, they don't protect their own community, not because they're evil, because the emotion loop is short-circuited. The system converts reality into a product experience, and once your mind treats truth as entertainment, it becomes easy to lie to you. You can be made to accept any narrative that fits the emotional template you've been trained to crave. You stop asking, what is really happening? You start asking, does this clip make me feel something right now? And if it does, you accept it as meaningful. That's why the boundary between reality and performance dissolves. You can't trust your own perception when your emotions are being farmed by editing styles. You become an audience pinned to a seat while editors and algorithms tear reality into pieces. Now, some of you might feel a small spike of fear right now. Good. Fear is a signal that you recognize something in yourself. If you suddenly feel tense about your phone lying nearby, that's your mind trying to protect your future. Because if the matrix is real, then your habits are not just personal quirks. They are leverage points. They are the entry door. And here is where resistance starts, by withdrawing attention. Not by smashing devices. Not by acting like you're above it. That's fantasy too. The system is too embedded for that kind of theatrical rebellion. The real rebellion is practical. It's neurological. It's a dopamine purge. You need to clean your reward system so that life can feel like life again. So now we get to the exit. Not a motivational phrase, a process. Rule 1 is content dieting. You treat information like food, because it is. If you pour junk into your mind all day, don't be surprised when your mind becomes junk. But content dieting isn't about being pure, it's about being intentional. You remove the fast poisons first. Useless short clips that deliver cheap thrills, celebrity drama that manufactures emotional outrage, sensational news that turns every event into a fear machine, and thirst-based bait that trains your nervous system to crave visual shortcuts instead of real connection. And yes, you can watch some entertainment. The point is not to ban pleasure. The point is to stop feeding the addiction that rewires your attention. You decide what enters your brain. You stop letting the algorithm decide what you deserve. Then you replace the missing stimulus with real nutrition, deep thinking content that requires sustained attention, classic books that train patience, multi-perspective analysis that forces your mind to hold contradictions, real art that challenges you and stays with you after you close it. Here's the harsh rule. If it's too easy to consume, it usually contains poison. Not because everything easy is evil, but because substance takes effort, and effort is the gate that keeps manipulation out. Your brain will resist at first. It will crave the familiar hits. That craving is not a sign you need that content, it's withdrawal. Rule 2 is reclaiming control over empty time. Empty time is not a dead zone, it's your mind's workshop. Every day you create space that doesn't belong to technology, and you don't create it as an afterthought. You schedule it like an appointment with your own life, an hour per day, walking without a phone, sitting without a feed. Practicing something that involves hands, drawing, playing music, gardening, building, repairing, anything that forces your attention to stay in the real world long enough for your creativity to wake up. And you must learn how to be bored again, not as punishment, as training. Your brain has been taught to treat boredom as failure. You must teach it. Boredom is safe. Boredom is where your truth surfaces. Boredom is where you stop hiding from yourself. The problem isn't boredom. The problem is that your mind is addicted to distraction because the inside of you is uncomfortable. Once you face the discomfort, it becomes manageable. Once it becomes manageable, your desire changes. You stop wanting shallow stimulation and start wanting honest experience. But the system can't allow that. It needs you to remain busy, so it keeps finding ways to fill your gaps, which means you have to protect your gaps. Rule 3 is switching from being a consumer to being a creator. This one is non-negotiable because passive attention leads to passive identity. If you want to break the matrix, stop using entertainment as a substitute for living. Living requires building something, a skill, a project, a relationship, a body, a plan, a set of values demonstrated through action. You don't just watch cooking videos for 2 hours, you cook something real. You don't just watch theory about thinking, you write your own thoughts. You don't just watch people travel, you plan your life like a person who intends to move. When you create, you produce internal evidence that you are not powerless. That internal evidence dissolves the need to outsource motivation to other people's narratives. And it makes you harder to manipulate because a creative mind isn't only reacting, it's directing. You become too busy building your life to keep watching someone else's script. And here is why that matters psychologically. The Matrix wants you to be a funnel, not a force. It wants you as a passive receiver, a battery that gets drained forever, an endless loop of consumption. It wants your energy to go outward into products instead of inward into self-development. But when you take action, you restore agency. Agency is the antidote to hypnosis. Now, there's an uncomfortable truth that follows all of this. A lot of people don't actually want freedom, they want relief from responsibility. Because freedom requires you to face your choices. It requires you to confront the possibility that your life is shaped by your habits. It requires you to mourn what you've ignored. Entertainment offers an anesthetic. Creation offers pain with dignity. Anesthetic is easy. Dignity is harder, and that's why most people choose anesthetic. But you're watching this, so maybe you're not most people anymore. So here is the call to action, and it's simple enough to be terrifying. Turn off the screen, but not as a dramatic gesture. Turn it off as a decision to hear yourself. When the silence comes, don't immediately panic. Stay there long enough to notice what appears. You might feel grief. You might feel loneliness. You might feel anger at how long you've been trained to escape. You might feel fear about your future because you've avoided thinking about it. Let those feelings be information, not a threat. You can handle yourself. You just haven't practiced. Ask the question that social feeds train you to avoid. What do I truly need? Not what do I want to feel? What do I truly want beyond the identity that gets applause? If you can answer those questions even partially, you begin to reclaim the steering wheel. The world is deeper than your feed. The world is more brutal and more beautiful than curated clips. Real life doesn't arrive with perfect lighting, dramatic music, and a dopamine peak on schedule. Real life is slow. Real life is messy. Real life is built through repetition and discomfort, and that's why real life is yours. The Matrix is dangerous because it makes you forget that your attention belongs to you. So take it back. Start today with 1 hour of empty space. Start today with a content diet that cuts the cheap hits. Start today with one act of creation that proves you are not just watching, not a promise, not a resolution, an action. Because the hidden self isn't a ghost you have to discover someday. It's the part of you that was pushed aside by constant stimulation. You're not broken, you're distracted. And distraction can end when you stop bargaining with your own captivity. Welcome back to reality. Welcome to the moment you earned by finally noticing what was happening to your mind and refusing to cooperate anymore.